Hey everyone, and welcome back to our In the 99 Deck Tech series. I'm Reid, and today we're talking about Kadena, the Slinking Sorcerer. Kadena is a 3/3 Naga wizard for 1, a black, a green, and a blue. That says the first face-down creature spell you cast each turn costs 3 less to cast. It also says whenever a face-down creature enters the battlefield under your control, draw a card. So with Kadena, we're going to be looking at doing a morph deck. Let's take a few minutes to discuss what it is about morphs that makes this deck so unique. So every morph creature can be cast for 3 colorless, which means that Kadena's first ability will trigger each time we try to cast one of those morph spells. In addition, anytime that we put a creature into play that is actually a card face down, that draw card trigger is going to go on the stack. This applies for morphs, manifests, and unique abilities like Ugin the Ineffable. But let's go ahead and get into the deck tech. Let's start with the morphs. So the first category of morphs that we're going to talk about is the removal morphs. So each of these, when they get turned face up, they're going to put a trigger on the stack that will remove something from the battlefield. So Antioch Survivalist and Nantuko Vigilante are going to remove artifacts and enchantments, while Silumgar's Assassin, Echo Tracer, Ice Feather Aven, and Bane of the Living are going to remove creatures from the battlefield. Chrome Shell Crab is going to let us turn one of our already used morph cards into one of our opponent's creatures by swapping them on the battlefield. The next group of morphs I want to talk about is the card advantage morphs. So these morphs, when turned face up, will give us some card advantage over our opponents. Grim Haruspex and Riptide Survivor are both going to let us draw cards, while Unblinking Bleb will allow us to scry every time we turn a morph face up. Monastery Lore Master and Den Protector will allow us to return a card from our graveyard to our hand. Lastly, Weaver of Lies allows us to reuse any of the morphs that we've already used. This is going to be crucial to keeping ahead of our opponents. The next group of morphs all have to do with countering our opponent's spells in some way. So Kadena Silencer will allow us to counter our opponent's abilities, while Keru's Spell Snatcher allows us to counter the spell and cast it later. Stratus Dancer allows us to counter an instant or sorcery, and Void Mage Apprentice allows us to just counter a spell. Willbender allows us to change the target of any one spell to a different legal target, and Mischievous Quanar, which might be the strongest card in this category, allows us to copy instants and sorceries on the stack. In addition, it allows it to turn itself back face down to reuse this ability anytime we want. There's 2 very powerful morphs in this deck that essentially work as a board wipe if used in the right timing. So Brine Elemental, when turned face up, is going to make our opponents skip their untap step. Likewise, Thousand Winds allows us to return all tapped creatures when it turns face up. 2 extremely unique morphs in the deck are Zoetic Caverns and Gift of Doom. Zoetic Caverns can essentially work as ramp. While Gift of Doom is a great way to surprise your opponents, the last couple morphs that we have to talk about are Death Mist Raptor, which will return to the battlefield pretty consistently, Vesuvian Shapeshifter, and Soul Collector, which will allow us to utilize our opponent's creatures that they play. Salt Road Ambushers and Primal Whisper are both our big hitters. The last one is Shore Crash Elemental. This creature allows us to turn it face down for 1 blue mana. Moving on, the next category is manifests. To help us manifest cards, we've got Scroll of Fate, Ethereal Ambush, Right into Being, and Jeskai Infiltrator. Additionally, we can use Whisperwood Elemental to both manifest cards and abuse board wipe potential. If opponent goes to board wipe, we trigger its secondary ability, sacrificing it, and making sure that we end up with creatures on the battlefield after the board wipe. In a similar fashion, Thieving Amalgam allows us to manifest the top card of our opponent's libraries on their turn. The most powerful card in our manifest inventory is Primordial Mist, which allows us to manifest the top card of our library at our end step, but more importantly, allows us to exile any of the face-down cards that we control to then cast for their mana cost. It will allow us to pair it with Thieving Amalgam and cast the cards that we manifest from our opponents, or cards that aren't creatures from our own library. Now, morphs can get pretty expensive, costing 3 mana to put down as a 2/2, and then a certain amount of mana to unmorph most of the time. So we're going to try to make that cheaper by using cards like Dream Chisel and Obscuring Aether, which will reduce the cost by 1, and then Heartless Summoning, which will reduce it by 2, and Ugin the Ineffable, which will also reduce it by 2 since morphs are colorless spells. Ugin also has a wonderful +1, which is going to take a card off the top of our library and not manifest it or morph it, but just put it face down as a 2/2 spirit. The deck also has a couple of ways to draw cards off of our morphs. Aphedo Runecaster and Secret Plans allows us to draw cards whenever one of our cards is turned face up. In addition, Beast Whisperer is going to let us draw a card whenever we cast a morph, and Guardian Project actually allows us to draw a card when we cast a morph. Because morphs have no name, when we go to cast it, Guardian Project registers that there's no other card with that name on the battlefield. So, we will actually get to draw a card off of Guardian Project. We have a handful of unique cards to pair with our morphs. Leyland of Anticipation, Winding Canyons, and Alchemist's Refuge will allow us to cast spells at instant speed. Primarily, our morphs. Since Kadena says the first face-down creature spell you cast each turn costs 3 less, if we can cast spells on our opponent's turns, they'll cost 3 less too. Sometimes you just need good old-fashioned protection from board wipes, so we've thrown in Heroic Intervention. And a good way to close out the game after it's gone on for a long time, Ghastly Conscription will allow us to manifest all of the creature cards in one player's graveyard. The last card that we have in this category is Ixidor, Reality Sculptor. Ixidor is going to give all of our face-down creatures +1/+1, and more importantly, allow us to turn any of them face up for 3 mana instead of their normal morph cost. We have a nice standard ramp package, including the morph-specific card Trail of Mystery, which will allow us to go get a basic every time a card is turned face up. In addition, we're using Seedborn Muse and Wilderness Reclamation to have our mana untapped on our opponent's turns so that we can unmorph our cards as we see fit. We also have a great standard removal package, including 3 powerful board wipes in All Is Dust, Washout, and Ixidron. All Is Dust and Washout, since morphs are colorless, will allow us to be very selective on what cards get removed from the battlefield. The most important thing to remember about Ixidron is that it will turn all other creatures face down. If a card doesn't have a morph cost associated with it, it will not be able to turn back face up while it is a 2/2 creature. This is a good way to lock your opponents out of having their commanders, but you can also fall into the same pitfall if Kadena gets turned face down. Some important lands that we still haven't talked about are Ancient Tomb, Shrine of the Forsaken Gods, and Temple of the False Gods. Tomb of the Spirit Dragon is going to let us gain life equal to the number of morph or manifest cards we have on the battlefield. We also have a small package of fetch lands to make sure we get our colors, and a handful of other lands to target with our fetch lands, including a good number of basics for that Trail of Mysteries we talked about earlier. As you can see with this deck, we are trying to utilize the unique properties of morph with Kadena's abilities to cast out our creatures, draw cards, and then eventually overwhelm our opponents with our 2/2 armies, unless they become something else. Thanks for tuning in, and if you enjoyed this deck tech, give us a like, tell us why, share, and subscribe, and we'll catch you next time.